Superhero movies allow us to be momentarily suspended in a fictional universe, while also seeing ourselves within different characters. With all of the destruction that occurs in these movies, death and grief are inevitable. Although superhumans are powerful, at their very root they are still human. Even superheroes need to grieve. The problem is the negative portrayals of grief within superhero movies. Without much variation, Marvel's portrayals of grief in the MCU often paint grieving individuals as villainous, which places a negative stigma on grieving. To explain this concept, I will be using Yelena Belova and Xu Wenwu as examples. Thanatology is the study of death. If the name sounds vaguely familiar, it's because the MCU villain Thanos was named after it, as he is the personification of death in god form. Through thanatology, scholars have been able to compare society's relationship with death throughout history. Death used to be acceptable, but after the Industrial Revolution, when death moved from homes to hospitals and caregivers changed from family to medical professionals, it became harder to accept death as both permanent and inevitable. In the transformation process for becoming a hero, supers are often transformed through their trauma. As said by Brown in the modern superhero in film and television, the melodramatic formula of the superhero genre has always been rooted in suffering. Even before becoming a hero, most of the characters experience an early personal trauma that contributes to their lifelong mission of defending innocence. Overcoming these early personal and emotional tragedies marks the character with pathos and provides them with motivation, but it also indicates their heroic ability to overcome heartbreak. More recently in the MCU, movies have shown characters struggling with the heartbreak of loss, ultimately using their powers and abilities to overcome it physically instead of emotionally and mentally. These actions often turn them into villains, whether temporarily or long-term. Overcoming such heartbreak is what makes them a hero. In Hawkeye, one of the main points is that Yelena, the sister of Black Widow, has been tasked with killing Clint Barton to avenge her sister's death. This scene is the final fight sequence between the two of them, where Yelena goes through the 5 stages of grief. Denial. Throughout the scene, Yelena asks Clint multiple times about what happened to Natasha.
I need to know what happened.
Your sister sacrificed herself.
But every time he replies, she doesn't believe him.
You're lying.
Nobody killed her. She made a choice.
Stop lying!
You're not listening to me. She sacrificed herself. You understand? I couldn't stop her.
No.
The final time,
I fought her for it. But she was better than me.
she says,
You should have fought harder.
anger. As she's hitting Clint, we can see the anger she has about Natasha's death, as there is fire all around her. At this point, she's willing to put the blame on anyone. It's not until he whistles that she starts to listen. Bargaining. At one point, she talks about how she could have stopped or changed Natasha's death.
It shouldn't have gone this way. If I was there, I could have stopped it. I could have changed it.
Depression. This scene is set during Christmas, a time of joy that can be the loneliest time of year for those without a family. It's dark outside, and the only thing lighting up the scene is Christmas lights, which makes the scene sadder, as this should be a time of happiness, not violence. They're also both wearing black, the color of mourning. Acceptance. The scene finishes with Clint saying,
She made her choice. We're gonna have to find a way to live with that.
At this point, both Yelena and Clint are united in their grief and start down the path toward acceptance. In comparison, in Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, Wenwu deals with his grief in a very similar way. Though he was a villain before meeting his wife, he reverted back to his old ways after her death. In this scene, Shang-Chi tells his father that his mother is gone.
She's not back there, Dad.
But he doesn't believe him.
Get out of my way, boy.
His grief blinds his judgment and causes him to make terrible decisions, such as letting out the Dweller in Darkness after believing it was his wife. Also like Yelena, he tells Shang-Chi that he should have fought harder to save his mother.
You were there when they came for her, and you did nothing. You stood at a window and watched her die.
Grief causes him to misplace the blame for his wife's death. Eventually, once he realizes his mistakes and reaches acceptance, he dies. He is essentially killed by his own grief. Both Yelena and Wenwu are shown in the same light, which demonstrates that this representation is not a sexist decision. They have been seen as villains throughout the entirety of their respective projects, but are both redeemed at the end. They are no longer villainous once they have accepted death and finished grieving. There are very few positive representations of grief in the MCU. Cersei from Eternals has been the most positive. She, as well as a few of the other Eternals, grieved Ajax's death in a non-threatening way. Instead of fighting with others because of her death, they processed their emotions and grief with each other. This shows that it is possible for characters, even those who are super, to deal with their grief in a more humane way. Representation in superhero movies is very important. As one of the most influential and widely enjoyed genres, it is crucial that superhero movies portray people in an inclusive yet realistic way. Marvel portrays going through the stages of grief as villainous until characters reach acceptance. Grief is a harsh reality of life. The things we will do for those we love are forever expansive, which explains the lengths grieving characters will go to in order to escape the reality of death, often ending in destruction, both of themselves and others. But as said by Vision,
but what is grief? If not love, persevering.
Grief does not need to be negatively represented in order for love's true potential to be revealed. I hope that in the future, Marvel and other studios will change their current grieving formula. There are ups and downs when it comes to grief, and with more inclusive representations, we can all begin to understand each other and grow from our losses.